I'd like to welcome Otello Stampacchia to the panel. Otello is the founder and managing director of Omega Funds, and he's a prolific life science investor. So welcome to the panel, Otello.
Thank you.
And maybe let's start by tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and the Omega Funds.
Before that, can you hear me? Maya, can you hear me? Raise your hand if you do. Okay, good. Sorry, that's my wife. She's sitting in the back. So before I do that, just a couple of things about you guys. How many of you are the first time at the conference with a venture capitalist? Raise your hands. Okay, that's more or less the number of phones that were ringing before, so turn them off. How many of you are PhD students? Only one? Okay, good for you. I'm a PhD too. How many of you are MD students? Okay. How many of you are professors or teachers at university? Great. So I'm wondering, what do you all, how many of you are undergrads? Okay. I'm really missing a big percentage of the population. Okay, anyway. My personal background, I'm not sure if you can tell from the accent, but I'm not American. I'm actually Italian. From the south of Italy, used to be a part of Greece a few hundred years ago. So that's probably the extent of my affinity. Oh no, and I come to Greece for a conference every summer. There you go. So I was born and raised in Italy. I did an undergrad in genetics close to Milan. I left for my PhD. In between, I actually spent 6 months in Crete at the IMBB, mapping the Drosophila genome. At the time, there were no automated sequencers, by the way. My PhD was in molecular biology in Switzerland. During 3 years of my PhD, I studied patent law because I didn't necessarily want to stay in academia. I decided patent law was a little bit boring for me, so I went to study finance after a while. I actually joined an investment bank in London called Goldman Sachs. It's an American bank. And I spent the next 3 years between London and New York working on the healthcare pharmaceutical team, doing IPOs as well as mergers and acquisitions. So after that, I joined a Swiss bank that had a investment vehicle in biotech in Geneva. That didn't last very long. And afterwards, I joined a very large fund of funds who was investing in healthcare as well as other sectors. And in 2003, just the day of my wedding, actually, I started Omega Funds. So Omega is a venture capital vehicle. For those of you who don't know what venture capitalists do, Manos can tell you. But the essence of the job is to listen to people who have ideas, like some of you did earlier today, and then to identify things that are both, interesting to invest in and have a certain probability of success. So I'll tell you a couple of things about the fund in a second, but the two most important parts of our job are network connectivity and pattern recognition. Both require a certain number of years of doing this and require a certain capability of networking. Now, obviously, being Southern Mediterranean, I have a genetic advantage on the networking part of things, and so should you. So focus on the network connectivity parts earlier in your career. I think is very important for whatever you decide to do. And actually, as a little anecdote there, all of my jobs came from meeting somebody and talking to the person sitting next to me. So, obviously not while I'm talking, but please do speak to the person next to you, try to find out what they're doing, and so on. So Omega is a fund that now has about 15, 16 people. We manage a little bit less than $1 billion. We have main offices in Boston, second offices in Geneva. We have one person in San Francisco that we just added recently. In terms of the area of focus is mostly on the drug development and discovery side. Actually, anti-infectives and antibiotics is a big part of what we do. And we still regret not having invested in Manos' company. We also do quite a bit in oncology. There's quite a few companies that we invested there that were either acquired or went public for over $1 billion. So we've been quite lucky there. We look at some other areas, including biology platforms, antibody platforms, and so on. So we have a fairly broad area of focus. We have done some medtech investments. I have to say we have not been as successful as Aris there. I have to say we actually kind of suck. So maybe that's a question of why we suck there that Aris will ask me later. And I think right now we look at investments mostly in continental Europe, and that means UK, Switzerland, Benelux to a certain extent. Benelux, you can remove the Lux from there. There's really not a lot of biotechs in Luxembourg, and something in Scandinavia, though we have invested in France and Germany. And then, of course, US. At the moment, US is about 2/3 of where we invest our money.
Great. No, thank you. That's you've done a lot.
It's not just me, by the way.
Well, you collectively have done a lot. Yeah. And the Omega funds come with a very good reputation as knowledgeable investors in the life sciences space. So tell me a little bit about your approach. How do you look at opportunities? I mean, clearly life sciences, as we said earlier, are transforming today. There's new areas developing. How do you pick where you place your bets? And you mentioned a little bit the pattern recognition. That's important skill to sort of your investment. It's part of your investment skill. But tell us a little bit about where do you see the opportunities? How do you select them? What drives that process?
Yeah, so there's two parts to this, I think. One is, what do people need to do to get our attention? Which I think is important perhaps for some people in the audience. And then how do we, once our attention is being gotten, I guess, what do we then do to then process and decide where to invest? Maybe I start with the first for a second. So again, remember network connectivity, right? So it doesn't necessarily look because I came in a t-shirt, but we actually are fairly busy, and the entire team is fairly busy, not necessarily myself. But so always try to find a shortcut, which is somebody that knows us already. You might have the best thing in the world. If it's hard to connect with the people that are interested to it or into it, it's really not going to work. So, do your homework. Today's, there's a number of ways of identifying if you know people in common with a certain person, from LinkedIn to other sources. And the best way is, identifying one of our CEOs or somebody that we know very well, or another venture capitalist, or a great professor that started a company before, as somebody that can then be the introduction to a venture capitalist. It's going to help you a lot. It's going to shorten the process. It's going to get you a lot more attention. So again, try to identify some kind of point or connectivity with these people. Ultimately, I know we all, or at least some of us, are scientists or used to be scientists. Truth is not self-evident. This is going to be another message that I'd like you to take home today. Truth becomes self-evident when somebody points it out to you. Before that, it isn't. So always try to identify somebody else that can introduce you. So maybe that covers aspect one. I think aspect two, like everybody, we try to have a process. And we resume the process into something that we call the 6 Ps, just because it's easier to do it with a single letter, I thought. You can imagine P has a number of meanings in English, and my entire team has been making fun of me for the last couple of years because of the P, but fine. So people is the first P, so we spoke about that. So again, you might have the best idea in the world if you are, and I'm going to take Italy as an example, a professor at University of Brindisi, which is actually fairly close to the town I come from, and you haven't published anything on it in some kind of relevant journal, and or you don't have any advisors that are fairly recognizable on an international scale, I think, again, very hard to pass the bar. So again, try to associate and identify, obviously try to publish, but science, if it's great science, gets recognized, and it's important that recognition is relatively self-evident. So people, products, if it's a pharmaceutical product you're developing, or a device, what is the unmet need? What are you trying to address? And how does your product solve that? We call that product and precedence. So what's existing in that area? Why is it not working? Why is your product better? And then pipeline, meaning how do you develop it? How much it's going to cost? What are the inflection points? purchasers. Is somebody going to buy this, right? Is the patient going to decide if they're going to buy? Is the physician, again, the P's, I'm sorry, it's just a thing of mine. Are the physician going to make the decision? Is the pharmaceutical company going to buy it? So again, those are important decisions. We can probably help you figure those things out, but again, we don't have a lot of time in theory, so the more that you figure out, the higher your proposal gets in terms of quality rating, the higher the probability that you get funding is. So I think I covered some of the second aspect. Obviously, there's some nuances there, but perhaps too much detail to go into right now.
No, that's very helpful. I think that gives people an idea of what you would find as important things. You touched upon one thing. I mean, an example of a professor, an academic from the University of Brindisi. But supposing that there is somebody comes with an idea or a novel technology here from a university that's a little bit in the periphery of Europe in terms of, and I'm not saying that in a bad way, but not in a central ecosystem. I mean, it doesn't come from an area where another 50 biotech companies have come out of. So one of the universities here. I mean, would that be something that you find is an extra obstacle, or what would that what would that team need to do to sort of overcome that? If you want a little bit of a disadvantage potentially because it doesn't come from that network that's already recognizable to an investor like you.
Yeah, and I'll stick to Brindisi because I don't want to offend anybody in Greece. I think it's absolutely a disadvantage, right? I think it was Elias earlier who mentioned that VCs like to invest to places where they can walk to, and actually in my personal case that's fairly true. I mean, I don't own a car in Boston and I can walk from my apartment 20 minutes to Cambridge and 15 minutes to the office. There was a rational choice. Now obviously we fly, but to fly to Greece is not particularly straightforward, even from Central Europe, and so that definitely is an issue. How do you solve and potentially address that issue, I think is perhaps the more relevant feedback. And again, it comes back to the quality of your data, right? If it's published in a certain category of journals, obviously that raises the bar. If you then manage to associate with other collaborators, other founders, other individuals who can be scientists, who can be former pharmaceutical or medical device executives, because they've also seen this before, though through slightly different lenses, but they've seen it before. So having that kind of validation, in a sense, is very important. I mean, it's a lot easier for me to see people like Manos or Elias or you being involved with a company, say, okay, I know these guys, I know how they think more or less like me, therefore I'm not going to find the usual problems that I find from the University of Timbuktu or whatever. And again, no relationship to Greece. So again, it comes back to the quality of the data, the quality of the science, peer review publications. Sorry, publications was one of the P's, I forgot to mention it. And the peer network that you manage to put around you. So again, network and publish.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. And I'm going to bring another P into the into the discussion, and I don't know if it's one of your 6 P's, but one thing that I see as becoming and as an investor I find useful. Is a kind of a tick mark is the partners. So either researchers or entrepreneurs or startups that have developed partnerships, as we saw earlier in the closed session, they develop partnerships with large pharma or partnerships with with large medical device companies. Those do you find that those give credibility, and this would you encourage?
Absolutely.
And what sort of because that's it's obviously
Balancing
a bit of a balance act, because you don't want the big gorilla to be too close to you, because they love you and they hug you and then they squash you. So what kind of relationship would you advise people to kind of develop?
No, it's a fundamental question. I'll give you the Harvard Business School answer. I didn't go to Harvard Business School. The Harvard Business School answer is it depends. So it depends. So it's a very helpful answer, as you can imagine. So I'll try to break it down perhaps a little bit more. So if your business, your product, your offering is scalable, meaning if your thing can be split up in a number of different pieces and the same pieces can be sold to different people, by all means, partner as early as you can. It's a validating contact and it's a validating contract, right? It means if somebody who's a big company who has a process, who has people to convince, who has committees, has decided to buy the product, it's obviously a big tick on our boxes, right? Because somebody else has done the homework. I mean, fundamentally, notwithstanding the fact that we're supposedly busy, we are fairly lazy people, right? I mean, if somebody else has done the work for us, it's a lot easier to get our money. So I'll give you the little secret about the venture capital industry. So again, if your product can be parceled, and I'm really struggling to find peace for all these things, but then absolutely partner it out. However, if you have a single, and I'm going to the extreme, oops, I moved my hands too much. Apparently, being Italian, it's part of, yes, it's part of my, it's part of my characteristics. If you have a single molecule which has some very well-defined activity against, oncology, a particular disease, you can't really partner that to 5 different people. So the choices then you have there is how far along do I go before I either sell the company or try to go public versus trying to partner early. So that is a very difficult decision. It does ultimately come down to, can you raise the money to take it all the way, or at least a certain part of the way? And again, there are some very meaningful geographic differences that were described earlier by you and Elias. It's a lot easier if it's a fundamentally groundbreaking discovery with a couple of 2 or 3 very important key opinion leaders. It's extremely easy to raise that kind of sizable amount of money in the US to then go all the way. Obviously Europe, and I assume particularly Greece, might not have that kind of facility in raising that kind of capital. So again, you need to understand where you are in the value chain and in the hub. Yeah.
So switching gears a little bit, and the thesis or our sort of opening thesis or assumption is that we are at this sort of turning point in life sciences. That's there's an inflection point where life sciences are. There is innovation in a number of areas. There is convergence and so forth. So first is would you agree with that? And then second, within that environment, I mean, how would you do you position your own funds, and what do you see as the what excites you in terms of what's coming in the next few years from life science innovation?
Yeah, so that's a few questions. I'll start with the first one. Are we in a potential turning inflection point in life sciences? It's very hard to identify inflection points when you're in them. It's just hard. I mean, a lot of historians will tell you that. Is there any people who study history here? You're in Greece, so most of you need to raise your hands. Nobody study history? Really? Okay. But any historian will tell you that it's very hard to see something fundamentally happen while you're living it. So history usually takes 30, 40 years to come there. And right now, I think the answer is yes. And you mentioned CRISPR before. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of fundamental advances, particularly in sciences, in medicine, in genetics, and so on, are done by tools. I think tools are usually underappreciated in terms of how much they contribute to actual progress. And I think we are in a fantastic environment in terms of the cost of genetic sequencing, the availability of tools and screening, the actual fundamental understanding of biology that we are seeing in oncology and a number of other areas. And just to give a silly example that hopefully won't get lost, there is a particular molecule that was discussed at the American Association for Clinical Oncology. In 2010, there was an antibody against a CTLA-4 antigen. It's now approved on the market. It's ipilimumab from BMS. This whole area started immuno-oncology, and this is supposed to be a $60–70 billion pharmaceutical market in the next 4 or 5 years. This thing started 4 or 5 years ago. it's incredible how fast this is moving in this field. So absolutely yes to the first question, notwithstanding the fact that normally you're not supposed to say that. When it comes to the other two questions, I'm afraid I might need a refresher.
Yeah, there were. So what excites you about what's coming in the next few years from this area?
Okay, so there might be a bit of a difference between what's exciting and where we are going to invest, but I'll start with what's exciting. I think oncology is a big part of what we do. Again, we were involved in quite a few companies that were fairly successful there. And we send a lot of our junior guys to all the big oncology conferences, and every time they come back, there's a huge amount of excitement about the latest discoveries. There is going to be a pause, I think, for the next couple of years, but I still think oncology has a huge amount of lessons that can be learned and will be learned relatively shortly, and they will mean fundamentally human cures. And these were diseases where you would consider yourself lucky if you get an extra 3, 4, 5, 6 months of life. In a number of these diseases, we're actually approaching, for at least for a certain percentage of the population, cures. And I'm talking lung cancer. When you actually think about the impact of society, lung cancer is incredible. It's bigger in terms of individuals affected than all the other cancers combined. Most people don't necessarily appreciate that. So if you can now get 20, 30% of the lung cancer patients who will never, they will die of something else eventually, but who don't die of cancer, they will die with cancer maybe, but not of cancer. I think that's amazing, right? So oncology is going to continue to derive and push forward that. And by the way, understanding of that biology will also have implications for many other diseases, because what's happening now, there's a fundamental new development in immunology, and that will affect, autoimmune disorders, even the answer to potential infectious diseases and so on. So some of those discoveries will trickle down to other diseases. We're doing a lot in the tools space, and tools not just sequencing, but a bunch of other areas. One thing I should have mentioned, we have a collaboration with MIT in Boston where we can actually invest in their spin-outs. And some of the stuff that is coming out of there is not traditional healthcare or biotech, but it's, advanced materials, other areas, and we find an incredible development by the computational power that is now, this thing is, I think, 100 or something times more the computing power that put the man on the moon. It more or less fits in my pocket, relatively small pockets. It's the big one, sorry, I'm not sure if you can see, but it's not the smaller one. So there's a lot of developments that can be done from that, and the development in software. You can now basically just take whatever software you need off the web with open access. So advanced materials is very exciting for us. I think there's a lot of things happening in terms of, this is not necessarily an area we will invest, but in digital healthcare, I think you guys had a very interesting presentation there. It is very hard for us to identify how it's easy to, turn a profit in those spaces. But when it comes to, again, the facility of them penetrating a large market, if you manage, which is not very easy, but if you manage to get on top of the hit parade on the Apple Store, you have hundreds of millions of people who can then download your application. So again, the question is it going to be meaningful? What are the barriers to entry? But your capacity of reaching a massive audience, it's unparalleled, because you have avenues of distribution that weren't there before. So all this is very new. The iPhone was launched in 2007. It's not even been 10 years. And it has completely changed, a lot of things that we do. And I think it's very hard to predict the kind of future, because honestly, the guys who create the future are the entrepreneurs or founders of these companies. We are basically just sitting there and listening to all these people. So, by the way, it's a fantastic job. I don't know if you can tell, but for somebody who's intellectually curious, I got the best job on the planet. All I need to do is sit down and listen to smart people every day. So that's very exciting for us.
Great. No, thank you. That's, all these things you touched on, I think, are elements that we can see. Just maybe trying, I'm also conscious of time that, sadly we'll have to wrap it up soon. But does this pace of innovation scare you to a point that, especially in the investment thesis where, you take your punt on something, it takes 3, 4, 5 years to develop. The speed of innovation today is sometimes much faster than that. Something can come and leapfrog you. By the time you have something going, new technology comes and it's, what you invested in, even, in this period of time is potentially obsolete. Does that sort of speed of innovation and all this disruption, ability to disrupt, does that scare you? And
yes.
and does it adjust your investment thesis in, maybe go a later stage, or do you have a response to that?
No, I think that's a very, you're approaching some fairly broad topics, and I don't necessarily have the capacity of being very succinct, but I'll try. I think there's pluses and minuses with fast pace of innovation. I think you pointed to the most kind of relevant, obviously, minus, which is, okay, you might have somebody coming out of nowhere who leapfrogs your product, and then you spend this money. The flip side of that is that if it's happening very quickly, hopefully you haven't spent too much money. That's one aspect. The second aspect is if the pace of innovation is faster, and I think we agree, though there's a caveat on that. Some of the easy problems have been solved, right? So especially in healthcare, in certain diseases, what's left overwhelmingly are the difficult problems. Now, there's more upside in solving difficult problems because it's harder and it's easier to get paid a lot of money for products that solve difficult problems. But I'll put that aside for a second. The advantage of having a faster pace of innovation is that if you again assemble the right company with the right management team, with the right people who can drive this forward, who can attract the amount of capital, who will then move this, the right way and faster, you do have a massive advantage on the competition, right? And I'll give you one example. There's a company in the US called Juno Therapeutics, which is a fairly sizable public company right now. The ticker is JUNO, like the month, not quite like the month in the US. Their Series A was 180 million. Which is a lot of money, even by US standards. They put together the best intellectual property from Memorial Sloan Kettering, Fred Hutchinson, Seattle Children. That allowed them to get a fantastic management team in place, so we invested in the Series A. And the demand for, they did the Series A, they closed it in December and January. By May, they'd done a Series B of 150 million, which was at a massive premium to the Series A. That went public by December of the year. Now, that is an incredibly exceptional example, but if you get this kind of concentration of skills, people, patents, products, and so on, first of all, try to have a subsidiary in the US. It's going to be a lot easier to raise a lot of money, but you can also go faster and create a much bigger moat around your particular products.
That makes sense. It's a sensible reactive strategy to that. Well, Otello, I think sadly we have run out of time, and
one question for the audience, at least one question. Two.
Yes, if you have the time, then let's one question. I think we can take.
Okay, so suggestion for your next conference: would we see prepare some questions? I think it's helpful more for you than for anybody else. Anybody else? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you. Good to have you.